Hello, welcome. You're watching Scatter Die Guy. We're talking about Warhammer: The Old World again today, and particularly today, what I thought would be interesting to talk about is I've got myself booked on in a couple of months to go to my first ever tournament, which I'm quite excited about. It's up in Nottingham at the TSN Arena, run by Rob from SquareBased, which is obviously the biggest Warhammer Old World YouTube channel out there. So yeah, really excited to go and get involved in that. It's a 500 point tournament. So I thought I would, for my first tournament, I would start small. And they're running these great foray events where they're doing 500 point lists as a sort of a bit more of a taster and an introduction for those who are less experienced with the tournament scene. So I'm going to be going, I'm taking my Bretonnians and I'm looking now at my lists. Particularly, obviously, if I need to get any new models ready, anything like that, now's a good time to start getting that nailed down and working out what I need to work on hobby-wise for the next couple of months to be ready for it. So it's 500 point lists, but it's 500 points with a few additional rules in terms of army selections, which make the list writing quite interesting. The rules they've gone with, they're actually based upon something that Games Workshop brought out themselves for a 500 point tournament they ran at Warhammer World last year. And then they've made a few little tweaks to them as well, which I think are quite interesting. So yeah, I'm just going to talk through my thinking, what I'm looking at in terms of some options at the minute. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts. Any feedback you've got, any comments would be really interesting. So 500 points. It's 500 points from any Grand Army or Army of Infamy list. There is a 2 unit minimum. So normally I think there's a 3 unit minimum plus a character for an army. But for 500 points for these rules, that's reduced to 2 units. Which I think, obviously makes sense. It's certainly possible to bring 3 units at 500 points, but obviously a bit more, restrictive there. So actually, reducing that to 2 units just gives you a bit more flexibility. And obviously you need a character for your general. And then there's some specific points restrictions. So at 500 points, most armies, you will be able to bring 250 points of characters. But the specific rules for this tournament and for the foray lists are that you're limited to a maximum of 125 points on any single character. So you can't just spend your full 250 points on one character. You've got to, you could spend 250 points on 2 characters if you want to, but you can't just bring a single 250 point character. Your 124 points on any single character. And as we'll see, that's quite interesting, just the way that sort of plays out, sort of how that restricts certain choices and forces you to make certain decisions is quite interesting. Similarly for the units, there are limits in terms of the points you can spend on individual units. So maximum 175 points on any single core unit, 150 points on any single special unit, and 125 points on any single rare or mercenary unit. If you're looking at mercenaries, I'm not going to talk about mercenaries today, but that would fall in that category. And I think particularly what this does is it obviously stops you doing the sort of the Death Star type thing, where you just bring a massive unit. Even if you've got very cheap models, like say you're running goblins or something like that, you can bring fairly sizable units, but you can't bring 90% of your points in a single unit and just build a massive brick. It kind of prohibits that meta, which is interesting. A few other rules. There's certain unit selections in a lot of armies where you can bring often like 0 to 1 per 1,000 points, which obviously in a 500 point game normally you wouldn't be able to bring. But the rule they've introduced is for this format, you can bring one of those options. So, if you've got multiple unit choices, you could bring a single unit that would be in that 0 to 1 per 1,000 points option. I believe they're also running the rule of 3. So that's basically you can take a maximum of 3 of any one unit type. You can't take more than 3. So if you were looking at doing sort of MSU type approach, you can't take lots and lots of the same thing. I mean, I don't think that's going to be too restrictive at 500 points. I'd be very surprised, but there's one list I've worked up where this does sort of come into play a little bit. The games themselves are going to be played on a smaller battlefield, so it's a 30-inch by 44-inch battlefield. And the way it gets set up, you basically only have about 15 inches between deployment zones, which I think potentially could be quite significant. Particularly with cavalry units, there is absolutely the possibility that we could be charging or being charged turn 1. So game sort of getting going much quicker than it is at the larger point sizes on the larger table, where first round you're unlikely to be getting into combat. It's much more just kind of positioning, that kind of stuff. And then subsequent rounds you get into it, whereas on this it's going to be straight in. It could be very fast. The other thing is that many missile units are going to be within range in turn 1, even potentially short range. So I think that's quite interesting, quite significant. In terms of the scenarios, there's 3 different scenarios that are going to get played out. I think there's 4 games, so one of them will get repeated. Each scenario is 5 rounds. That's 1 less than most larger games. I think the smaller tables obviously mean you start with units much closer, so the usual first turn of kind of closing the gap is essentially skipped. So I don't think it's going to have too much of an impact. What it does mean is that you're going to lose the opportunity for positioning that the first turn affords on a larger table. So deployment is going to be even more critical. You don't have any time to, in that first turn when you can respond to your opponent's deployment. You're with the potential that things are charging in the first turn. How you are positioned in deployment is going to be really, really key, I think. Some scenarios also include victory points for controlling objectives, including I think one where there's what I believe is going to be an occupiable. It's going to be it's got a tower. I assume it's going to be something that you can occupy in line with the rules in the old world rulebook. The key thing there: objectives can only be controlled by core units. Your core choices become quite important there. Occupying a tower is not necessarily required to control it, but it often, from my experience, is the best way to control it. And based on the old world rules, tower can only be occupied by an infantry unit with a unit strength of 10 or less. So particularly for Bretonnians, which is the armies I'm going to be looking at, an all cavalry army is potentially problematic there in that you can't occupy the feature. So starting to think about unit choices. First thing I think, which is interesting to just cover very quickly, is what can't I take? Because there's a whole load of things here that with these restrictions I'm not going to be able to bring. So with the unit and character max point limitations, they're potentially quite restrictive for Bretonnians in some ways. I think it's well known at this point that Bretonnians have some of the most powerful and, certainly some people would argue overpowered units in the game right now. I know, there is talk about, some bigger rules updates coming as part of the next FAQ. GW have hinted at that very clearly. So we'll have to see what comes there and whether that sort of, changes some of the balance. But, at present, There's some options in the Bretonnian forces which are really very powerful, and making them very powerful compared to a lot of other armies. But I think what's notable is that a lot of those options, which are sort of the big bad unit options for Bretonnians, become unavailable under these rules. So I mean, straight off the bat, the Green Knight, which I know is such a powerful model that in some tournaments I know it's even been completely banned. I mean, at 275 points in a 500 point game, we can't take the Green Knight anyway. So he's straight off the board. But our other special characters as well. So we have the Lady Elise Duchard and Sir Cecil Gaston, are the two other special character options for Bretonnians. And with the 125 points cap on a single character, both of these are immediately ruled out. So we're not bringing any special characters. And I think this is interesting because it does compare with other armies, at least some of whom do still have some options here. And the reason I think that's significant is that with a lot of special characters, it's not just about the character itself. They often have some very unique rules, and they have some very unique rules which sometimes can bring sort of like buffs to the army or units. So for instance, my good friend James, who I play a lot, has he plays dwarves, and he's got Burlock Damison, who kind of buffs shooting units in some really interesting ways, and that's still an option that could be brought under these rules. Whereas with Bretonnians, we don't have anything. So there's a it potentially puts us at a bit of a disadvantage here. Although I'm sure many other players of other armies would think it's fair due. Moving on, I think perhaps more significantly, what these rules also preclude is both our Lord level general option in the Duke, so 175 points base before we've mounted or equipped the Duke. They're clearly not something we can take within that 125 points cap on a single character. And also our top level caster in the Prophetess. So, at level 3, she is 135 points as a base cost, so not an option. Now, both of those probably a bit spendy in a 500 point army anyway. But I think it's fair to say Bretonnians are an army that lean on our big hitter characters. So whilst most other armies are going to be similarly restricted, for example, I'm not expecting we're going to see any level 4 casters in these games. I think that's quite an ask. I've not been through every other army list in detail, but I think it's unlikely to be possible. Certainly some other armies, they do have options for those Lord level generals. So, for example, a Dwarf King or a Rune Lord are both still viable, or an Orc War Boss. So there is the possibility that some of the other armies that could be coming to this, they could be bringing characters which are at that higher level. They can still make them work within that 125 points cost. And possibly, therefore, they could be presenting some problems which we might find it a little harder to present an answer to. On the flip side, as we'll discuss more in a minute, if we run an Exiles list, we do have access to a very well-priced level 3 wizard, which I think does bring us an advantage. I don't know, again, I haven't been through sort of all the other factions in detail and how these rules impact them, but I don't expect there are many other factions that have the ability to bring a level 3 caster. So yeah, an outcast wizard upgraded to level 3 does fall within the points cost. So that's definitely something which is an interesting and exciting sort of bonus that the Bretonnians can bring, certainly if we run the Exiles list here. The final thing we're not going to be able to take under these rules is a unit choice. So after the Green Knight, the sort of the jewel in the Bretonnian crown, I think at the minute, is the Pegasus Knights. But unfortunately, they're a base cost of 55 points per model, and a minimum unit size of 3, which means it's going to come to 165 points, which exceeds the 150 point limit for special units. So that's potentially quite a big blow under these rules, although I'm sure players from other factions will feel quite vindicated, probably feel that Pegasus Knights being so powerful already, they're arguably too powerful for a 500-point list. So, it's maybe a bit of a hit as a restriction, but probably fair at the same time. Moving on to what we can take, particularly I just want to think about those 0 to 1 per 1,000 point limitations that we're allowed to take one of these on these list writing rules. So first off, a Baron. So that's our sort of second tier hero character. We can take one of per 1,000 points. So across all of the army lists available, if we could take a Baron. If we do, we can't take any of these other things. Trebuchet similarly is available across all armies. Border Prince's Bombard, obviously only available on the Exiles list, but that's a 0 to 1. Knights Errant are limited 0 to 1 on the Exiles list. On other lists, you can't, there's no restrictions in the Errantry Crusade, and in a Grand Army, you've got to match them to units of Knights of the Realm. So, not too restrictive there. And not coming out of this allocation. Battle Pilgrims are limited in Exiles and Grand Army lists, but wouldn't be on a Errantry Crusade list. So where these are restricted to 0 to 1 or 0 to something per 1,000 points, the list rules say that we can take a single of these choices. So basically, we could take a Baron or a Trebuchet or a Border Prince's Bombard, but we can't take all of those things. We can only take one of those things. I think things like Knights Errant and Battle Pilgrims, to be honest, they're not units we're seeing a lot of play in any case. I think the one benefit to Knights Errant in these small points games is their relatively lower cost. But with Impetuous and on the smaller board sizes, you're going to have a very hard time controlling them. So I'm not particularly keen on them. I think they're probably best avoided. Trebuchet, likewise, is not seeing a lot of play. However, the Bombard definitely is for the Exiles list. I think it's one of these, potentially one of the strongest war machines in the game. So, if you're running an Exiles list, probably the big choice you've got to make there is between the Baron and the Bombard, because you can only take one of those two things. I think particularly with the Bombard, we're not going to see any Dragon meta at 500 points. I don't think that's possible with the points restrictions. But a big artillery centerpiece does provide an answer to opponents running lists which put a lot of points in a single model and make it a very tough, very hard to deal with model, whether that be some kind of monster or potentially a very tough character. So, if we're looking at Exiles, that is a tough choice probably between, do we go for Baron, do we go for Bombard? What must I take? So Bretonnians are quite interesting. They're not the only army with this, but not many armies have this. In that there are mandatory units you have to take in some of the different army lists. I think the impact of that is that it can sort of drive the shape of the army a bit more, and potentially gives us less flexibility than other armies have. But let's go through the list. So, starting with the Grand Army, you've got to take one or more units of Knights of the Realm. They can either be mounted or on foot. And you've got to take one or more units of Peasants, so either Peasant Bowmen or Men-at-Arms. If you were sort of looking to just absolutely minimise the points cost of this mandatory take, then you could take a unit of Knights of the Realm on foot. So minimum unit size of 5 for 55 points. And a unit of Men-at-Arms, minimum unit of 10 for 40 points. That brings the total to 95 points, which is already, a sizable chunk of your allocation. In practice, I don't think we're going to take either of those units. We know that kind of infantry is not great in the game right now. Obviously, we'll see what upcoming rules changes do. But we're more likely to take Mounted Knights of the Realm, which are a minimum of 120 points for a unit of 5, and Peasant Bowmen, which are, with their longbows, they are a great option. They can skirmish as well. 50 points for a minimum unit of 10. So that would give you a sort of a basic spend there of 170 points on those mandatory takes. The good news is that comfortably exceeds your minimum core requirements, so you don't have to take any more core at that point. So yeah, I think the impact of this, at least when you're running the Grand Army, and we'll see in a second that the Exiles list is reasonably similar, is that our core kind of gets picked for us. This does run the risk that I think Bretonnian armies at this point size could all end up looking quite samey and predictable. We've got some flexibility with characters and probably a third unit, but we're always going to be building around this standard core. Certainly, say with the Grand Army. So it does, make us quite predictable and limits choice a little bit with this army list. If we look at the Exiles, the situation here is very similar. The only difference really is that we've swapped in that peasant slot the Men-at-Arms for Yeoman Guard. Yeoman Guard are a point per model more expensive than Men-at-Arms, so that pushes our minimum points expenditure to 105 points if you went with the Knights of the Realm on foot and the minimum sized unit of peasants. We'll talk a bit more about them later, but I mean, in practice, again, it's probably not actually that big an impact because we're more likely to want to take the Mounted Knights of the Realm and the Peasant Bowmen, which, as we've already talked about, is 170 points minimum spend anyway. Moving on to Errantry Crusade. Errantry Crusade looks quite different. I think in the larger points game, Errantry Crusade's been the poorer cousin of the Bretonnian lists. It's not one that's getting huge amounts of play. I think probably because there's mandatory Knights Errant in it. But what's really interesting is at 500 points, we sidestep that. So we have to take a Paladin. He's the only required take. Because the Knights Errant are, 1+ unit per 1,000 points, we don't have to take them at 500 points. So we're going to take a Paladin. Now, if we take a Paladin, we're not taking a Baron, I think is likely the case, because we're more likely to want to use our remaining points allowance either for units or if we want a second character, it's probably going to be a wizard of some sort. But if you're considering running with a Paladin anyway, which there's a good chance you may well be, then this list actually offers more flexibility than the Grand Army list. Because you're not forced to take a unit of Knights of the Realm. You're not forced to take a unit of peasants. You also get more options for core. So with this list, we can take a unit of Battle Pilgrims as core, and we can also take Squires as core, both of which are special in the Grand Army list. So if you are looking at that fairly traditional sort of makeup of an army, then there is some more flexibility here, which could be quite interesting. The other thing is to keep in mind with these rules that we have the points caps on the individual units depending upon which slot they go into. So if you take Battle Pilgrims or Squires as special in a Grand Army, you're a bit more restricted in terms of how much points you can spend on a single unit versus if you take them as core in the Errantry Crusade, you can build a bigger unit if you want to. So that's interesting, just the options that we have there. So, I think potentially Errantry Crusade kind of could be interesting, 500 points with these rules. It certainly gives you more flexibility, which I think is exciting. Okay, moving on. Let's have a little look, starting with some character builds. I just want to go through the options, the things that we could take. So first off, in terms of our sort of main sort of general, particularly if we're looking like a sort of a fighty general, doesn't have to be, obviously we could take a wizard, a damsel or an outcast wizard, but if we're looking at a fighty general as our character, then we have an option with the Paladin. We could put them on a Royal Pegasus, and give them a lance. That brings them to 124 points, so 1 point shy of the 125 points cap. Obviously, we're not kitting them out with anything extra. You know, they're not taking any vows or magic items. They've got no points to spend on that. The other thing is we can't take a shield, so we only get a 4-up save. And also, honestly, and to be honest, this is my biggest issue with this build would be, I think that model would just look quite weird without a shield. Seems odd. I don't like the aesthetic of that. But you know, the Royal Pegasus is an absolute monster. You know, and this would be quite a big hitter for a mounted character at 500 points. You know, you get +1 toughness, +1 wound, and then the Pegasus itself has 5 attacks at weapon skill 4, strength 5 with armor bane 1. It also has 2 stomp attacks, and of course it's got fly 10 and swift stride, so incredibly maneuverable, particularly on these smaller board sizes. It's going to be able to zip about any way you like it, position it any way you like it. So you know, that really powerful mount option there. Another option would be to swap the Royal Pegasus for a Barded Pegasus. So in this case, your Paladin is basically an upgraded Pegasus Knight on his own. 96 points to take the Barded Pegasus and to give him a shield and a lance. Obviously not as powerful as the Royal Pegasus, but we still get +1 wound. And the Barded Pegasus has 2 attacks at weapon skill 3, strength 4. So still, you know, by no means bad. And in this case, we then have 26 points available potentially for upgrades. So, you know, we could take vows. You know, we could take the Grail Vow for 20 points, give him immune to psychology, magical attack, stubborn, and blessings of the lady. So that gives him the ward save. We could take some magical weapons. I think particularly of note, you know, so the Paladin is strength 4 as a base. Give him a lance, then on the charge he's strength 6, AP 2 with armor bane 1, but only for the charge. After the first, you know, if he's in a combat where he gets drawn into multiple rounds of combat without a break, then he's going to have to switch to another weapon. So having a magic weapon available could be really powerful. So a few things you could take the Sword of Striking, gives you +1 to hit. So I think that's quite powerful. The Sword of Might gives you strength +1, AP -1. The Biting Blade gives you AP -2, armor bane 1. Or the Sword of the Stout-Hearted gives you strength +2, armor piercing 1, armor bane 1, makes him immune to psychology. Obviously gives him magical attacks as well. The one compromise there is it does require 2 hands, so wouldn't be able to use a shield once he switched to that. But you know, really, you know, good range of fairly decent weapon choices there that could just give him a bit more punch in those combats that are lasting multiple rounds. You know, where things aren't broken straight away, and he's got to be able to hold up his own for multiple rounds of combat, and he can't use his lance. Another Paladin option, you know, if we're trying to go for just not completely blowing our budget on characters, we could mount him on a Bretonnian Warhorse. Again, with the shield and the lance, that comes at 82 points. Honestly, if you're running him on his own, I think, you know, for an extra 14 points, I would go for the Pegasus. I think you get a lot for those 14 points. But if you want to put him in a unit, then this option could work quite well. Obviously, it's cheaper, which gives you more money to spend on other things, potentially more money to spend on upgrades. So you've got up to 43 points you can spend on upgrades, which allows you to take most of the magic items on the, you know, available to Bretonnians. The one thing you can't take would be the Heartwood Lance, which is a 50-point magic item. I'm a big fan of that, particularly on a, you know, a Duke or a Baron, and would be pretty powerful on a Paladin at this points range, but that's going to be a little too expensive, so we can't take that. But we've got some good choices for other things we can take. You know, vows and magic weapons, potentially both. So yeah, another good option there, particularly if you are looking at putting him into a unit. Finally, if you were looking at just sort of absolutely minimizing your character spend, potentially to run larger numbers of models, Paladin on foot, only 60 points, potentially gives you 65 points for upgrades. And what I really like about this is Games Workshop produced this absolutely gorgeous model for a Paladin on foot with a great sword. It's one of the best models that they've released, in my opinion, for the old world. One of the best models in the Bretonnian range, and yet it basically never gets any play because you hardly ever would want to play a Paladin on foot. Particularly in the current meta with the way that infantry is not so great, but possibly at this points range, it might be something we want to consider, and it'd be cool to get that model on the table. Moving on, if we go up a rung, with a Baron, we can't get a Baron on a Pegasus of any type, but we can put him on a Bretonnian Warhorse. So Baron, Bretonnian Warhorse, Shield and Lance here for 122 points. No points for upgrades. Now, if you look at the stats, he has the same weapon skill, the same strength, the same toughness as a Paladin. What he does get is +1 wound, +1 attack, +1 initiative, and +1 leadership. So it's not a huge upgrade, but for quite a lot of points more. But if you were just going for what's the fightiest character I could build, this would be your option. Similarly, we could bring him on foot. Again, you could use that Paladin model. 100 points leaves 25 points for upgrade. I mean, if you gave him something like the Sword of the Stout-Hearted, so strength +2, armor piercing 1, armor bane 1, makes him immune to psychology, gives him magical attacks. Yes, it does require 2 hands, but actually he can't afford a shield anyway. It gets that really cool Paladin model on the table, but obviously playing it as a Baron. And if you were looking for a character on foot, that would be one way to play it. The last option for sort of a fighty general potentially is the Sergeant at Arms. It's not an obvious choice, but obviously we are looking at low points games. So if you wanted to sort of minimize your character expenditure, forgo your character allowance in favor of maximizing the number of models you can get on the table, with a view, potentially to overwhelming your opponent through sheer quantity, then this is the cheapest general you can field at 45 points, which obviously leaves you with 455 points to spend on your units. I don't think that's a strategy Bretonnians are really known for. Generally, Bretonnians, we've got lots of cavalry, higher points models, so we are generally going to be lower points model counts. But it's a possibility. We do have some very cheap core options in our peasants, so you could go that route. Moving on to our magical characters, we've got the damsel at level 2. She's 90 points. If you wanted to play her at level 1, she's only 60 points. But I think for the extra 30 points, that more than doubles the magic output. So you twice as many spells. 2 spells rather than 1 spell at level 2, and obviously your power level's higher, so you've got a better chance of casting and also a better chance of dispelling enemy spells. So I would strongly recommend the upgrade. If you're going to bring magic, let's bring level 2. At 90 points, she's still then got up to 35 points available to spend on upgrades, which could include a mount, or could include magic items if you wanted to. Or if we're running an Exiles list, we have a great option in the Outcast Wizard. So the two things which are really powerful with the Outcast Wizard. Firstly, it's quite cheap for a magic caster, and secondly, although it comes base as a level 1, normally you have a wizard option at level 1 that you can upgrade to level 2, and then you have a separate wizard option at level 3. which can also be upgraded to level 4. But those level 3 full wizards are going to be out of the price point almost across the board, but due to the 125 point restriction on characters. But the Outcast wizard can upgrade from level 1 all the way to level 3. So it gives us the ability to bring a level 3 caster. And I think it's probably one of very few level 3 casters that are going to be available within that points cap. And I think that's an advantage it therefore makes quite strong sense to lean into. Obviously, you could also take it at level 2, and that's still a strong choice for only 75 points. So that would be an alternative. But even at level 3, 105 points, you still got 20 points of that cap available if you wanted to buy any items or anything. So that there's some things you could do with it there. I think this is really strong, really quite a powerful choice that we could bring. Okay, moving on to look at units. In terms of core, Mountain Knights of the Realm. If we were to go for like that sort of standard lance of 6 models with a full command, that's 165 points. Or if you wanted to make a lance that a character's going to slip into, you could do a lance of 5 and take out the champion, but still have the banner and musician for 134 points, and then your general could slip into that unit. So those are both quite good options. Obviously, if you don't want to take the command, you don't have to. The one thing I would say is, there's no way you can build these guys up to a size within the points caps to get to the 4th rank. They would be too expensive, and you need to go to 4 ranks in Lance formation with these guys before you're going to get any kind of rank bonus. Taking a standard, taking musician, potentially quite critical to just giving you a bit more static combat res. Otherwise, you're going to find that they're going to lose a lot of the times on combat res just because other units are bringing those rank bonuses that they don't have. But yeah, unit 5, including your general, could be a really good option for these as peasant bowmen. So they're 50 points for your minimum unit size of 10. Within the 175 points cap for a core unit, you could bring up to 35 of these. So, that's a stonking great big unit of archers. A lot of firepower you could be bringing. You could give them a command. So your minimum unit goes from 50 points to 67 points if you give them a full command. However, I'm going to suggest that your goal is going to be to try and avoid getting into combat with these. So, whether you want to spend those kind of points on static combat res is questionable. However, given the small board sizes, you also might find it quite hard to avoid getting into combat with them. So there's that to consider as well. If you wanted to go like mass missile, it's certainly possible that you could bring an army where you could be bringing more than 80 of these guys. That's 400 points worth. So if you went, let's say, Errantry Crusade or something, with where you don't have to take Knights of the Realm, you could be bringing 80 plus bowmen. They've got a 30-inch range on their longbows. So remember these are small board sizes we're playing on. So that's a lot of shots which you're going to get off from the get-go. You could be absolutely raining arrows down on your opponent. And at that quantity, there is the potential of doing some real serious damage, which is quite interesting. These guys can also deploy in skirmish, which makes them quite a good option for screening your other units. So yeah, I think that they're a good shout. Men-at-Arms, 40 points for your minimum unit size of 10. These are your cheapest peasant option if you just want to spend the minimum on peasants and then nothing else. If you're trying to just bring like a really big brick, you could bring a unit of 43 of these within the 175 points cap. If your minimum unit, say 40 points, goes up to 57 with a standard command, so champion, musician, banner bearer. You've also got the additional option here of an additional command group member in the Grail Monk. So that's another 7 points to upgrade a model to the Grail Monk. And if you bring him, he basically acts like an extra champion. But he can also then bring, for another 25 points, the Blessed Triptych, which gives the unit Stubborn, which is a great rule. So, I mean, you're obviously increasing the cost a fair bit there, but, gives them a bit more staying power. My general experience with these guys is, don't expect too much. They're 4 points a model. They've got a poor to average profile. They're only weapon skill 2 and leadership 5, but they do have some good special rules. So they've got Horde, which obviously lets you increase your maximum rank bonus. So they could have a rank bonus of 3 potentially. They've got Warband, which means that they add their current rank bonus to their leadership. So that means again, if you're combining that with Horde, maximizing the ranks, you could be getting up to leadership 8. They've got Shield Wall, which means that once per game they can give ground rather than falling back in good order. They have, with the Blessed Triptych, that option for Stubborn, which basically means the first time that you have to take a break test, you could just decide to fall back in good order rather than take a break test. The equipment's also quite good. They've got a pole arm. So the pole arm, you've got 2 profile options with the pole arm. You can either fight in an extra rank, or you can use it two-handed, which gives you strength +1, AP -1. But it does require 2 hands, and they have shields as standard. So you would be foregoing, obviously, the armor save of that shield. But if you've got someone who's already got enough armor piercing that's essentially negated anyway, then why not? Obviously, losing the fighting an extra rank as well, I think, is significant. You would have to do the maths on that against specific opponents as to what's going to be the better choice. They are potentially a good sort of tar pit option, particularly with Stubborn. It's quite useful for just drawing enemy units out of position and putting them in places where they potentially are vulnerable to sort of being attacked in their flanks. I mean, personally, I wouldn't normally take these in bigger games, as I find they fold and die a bit too quickly. But at 500 points, possibly the issues that we've seen with infantry, and quite well known in this version of the game, may be less significant. Particularly if there are some rules changes as well, which might make infantry a bit stronger. On the Exiles list only, we've also got the option for the Yeoman Guard. So these guys, they're an extra point per model. And for that, you get +1 weapon skill, +1 leadership, and veteran, which means they can re-roll leadership tests, though not break tests. They come with a halberd as standard, which gives you strength +1, AP -1, armor bane 1, but does require 2 hands, which again mean they can't use their shield, which is part of their standard cost. You could swap it for a thrusting spear, which instead gives them fighting extra rank. That's a free change. Or for 1 point, you can give them the pole arm, which is sort of a best of both. It's not quite as strong as the halberd if you're using it two-handed, but it's very similar and basically exactly the same as the thrusting spear if you're going for that fighting an extra rank, and it gives you the flexibility is the big thing there. So yeah, they're 50 points for a minimum unit of 10. You could take a unit of up to 35 of them, so fairly good sized unit. And again, all those really good special rules. So Horde, Warband, Shield Wall. These guys get veteran as well. And again, you've got that option for Stubborn. Knights Errant. Their main benefit is they're cheap. Their lower points cost could allow you to take bigger units. So potentially you could take a lance of up to 19 Knights Errant, which I think is quite quite punchy. The lower points cost allows for that bigger unit, but their big issue, which is their big issue in bigger games as well, is that they're impetuous. But I think particularly in this game, a unit of cavalry, so they're already quite fast. They've got swift stride. So they've got huge great charge range. You know, you're basically the whole game. You're just going to be rolling to try and stop them to charge. If you don't want them to charge into things, they're just going to go. You're not going to be able to control them. For that reason, I think these are probably a pass for me. Moving into our special units, Battle Pilgrims. So 40 points for a minimum unit of 5. Maximum unit size of 18 within the points cap, or if you were running them in Errantry Crusade, you can take a unit of these guys as core, in which case you could actually get that up to 21. And they obviously have the option to take the Grail Reliquary. I think these guys are quite pricey compared to the other infantry options, and they're still quite soft for a heavy infantry unit. The key to effective use is going to lie in maximising the potential of their special rules. So they've got hatred all enemies, and they've got stubborn as standard. If you then give them the Grail Reliquary, this also gives them, a ward save via Blessings of the Lady, and if they're within 12 inch of a model with a Grail Vow, they also become immune to psychology, and critically they become unbreakable. The Grail Reliquary 65 points, which feels like a lot, but actually, you're essentially getting 6 additional Grail Pilgrims as part of that. So when you do the maths on that, it's actually only an extra 17 points for the Reliquary. The Reliquary has 6 attacks, and the difference between taking 6 individual models and a single base model like that with 6 attacks is that if you lose models from your sort of 6 individual models, you're losing attacks. Whereas with the Grail Reliquary, until all 6 of those wounds have been dealt, you're getting all 6 of those attacks. It's also worth noting, a bit like the way it works with like a banner bearer in a normal unit, the Grail Reliquary basically will not take any wounds until all other battle pilgrims in the unit are killed, which essentially means, like you could stab the guy holding the Reliquary, but another guy's just going to step in and take it. So what that means is you're always getting those 6 attacks back. And particularly, those 6 attacks, they are in the front rank. Whereas normally you'd have the 2 guys in the front rank and then the 4 guys behind them wouldn't be attacking. So it's doing a lot to give you a bit more output, and also to give you that ability to hit back. So if you're getting charged, if you're, or if you're fighting an enemy of higher initiative, even if they are doing a lot of damage, unless they have completely destroyed the unit, you are always going to get at least 6 attacks back. So that's quite powerful. The other thing is obviously it counts as a standard bearer and a musician, so it's great for combat res. Personally, I would say, if you're going to take Battle Pilgrims, the Grail Reliquary, and also, either some Grail Knights or a Grail Vow upgrade to your Paladin or your Baron for 20 points, are going to be a must, because there's very little point in taking Battle Pilgrims if you're not doing that. The other thing you could look at would be, you can think about putting a character in the unit. So a Paladin with the Grail Vow gives you quite a hitty character in a unit that's got a lot of staying power. So that's also a good option. And it just means that, you're always within that 12 inches, regardless of what your other units are doing. So that's quite powerful. And just a reminder, these guys can be taken as core in an Errantry Crusade list, which is quite interesting. Mounted Yeomen, so they're going to be 65 points for a minimum unit of 5, and fast cav, fire and fleece, skirmishers, option for feigned flight as well. I think they're a unit which are kind of outshone and don't get a lot of play in larger lists, but could present some quite interesting options at 500 points. The special rules make them very versatile. They're good for harrying the enemy, getting in there with their short bows. They've got skirmish, they've got reserve move, and so they can have feigned flight, and they've got fire and flee as well. So very powerful, very kind of a unit that can be quite annoying and tricky to deal with. If you want to go for a full command, give them the feign of flight rule, upgrade them to light armor. It's 100 points for a unit of 5. I think that's could be a good way of spending 100 points. They can be taken as core in Exiles as well, which is quite good. However, they're not available in an Errantry Crusade list. Questing Knights, 78 points for a minimum unit of 3. You can take a maximum of 5 due to the 150 point cap on special units. You can't quite take a full command, that would bring them 1 point over, but you could take a unit of 5 with a standard and a musician for 144 points. They are quite heavy hitters. They're weapon skill 5 with strength 4, and they've got great weapons, which is obviously going to make them strength 6. Armor piercing 2 and armor bane 1 does mean they strike last. They come with a shield as standard, but obviously you can't use that if you're using the great weapon. You could use a standard weapon, but if you're using the great weapon, you're not going to get that. So 4+ save generally. They do only have 1 wound and 1 attack. There's the possibility with a smaller unit you could take some kind of magical standard to upgrade them as well. These guys, they're special in the Grand Army list. They are rare in the Exiles list, which would be a bit more restrictive. And they're not available in an Errantry Crusade. Final special option, Squires. So these guys are fairly similar to Peasant Bowmen, but they can be taken as smaller units. They do cost a bit more, so they're 2 more points per model. But what that gets you is move through cover and vanguard. If you're going for a mass missile list, you'd probably be better taking more bowmen. But that does require you taking larger units due to the rule of 3. So if you're trying to go sort of more MSU, get more units on the table, then and do a missile-based list, then these guys could be a good option. The other thing I say is, only 35 points for a minimum unit. Because you can take them as small as 5. That does make them, quite a cheap unit potentially. So, sometimes where you've just got those, extra points available, they could be quite a good unit to fill that slot at 35 points. Moving on to our rare options then. Grail Knights. We're not going to be able to take many of these. We've got 125 points limit on rare options, and they are 114 points for the minimum unit of 3. You could take 1 command model, so probably the standard, if you wanted to try and give them a bit more static combat res. Grail Knights, been a bit disappointing in the game at large. They're not terribly competitive at the larger point sizes, mainly because they're very pricey for a single wound model. And I think that remains the issue here. The fact that we're going to be taking such small units of them for, essentially a quarter of our points cost. There's a lot of risk there in something, models of only 1 wound. They do get 2 attacks. So, even a unit of 3 is going to be getting 6 attacks off. They are weapon skill 6 and strength 4, which obviously with lances on the charge is going to get them up to strength 6 with armor piercing 2 and armor bane 1. They come with the Grail Vow, so that makes them immune to psychology and stubborn, and also gives them magical attacks. What these guys possibly could be good for is wiping out smaller units. So chucking them into small, not terribly strong units if your opponent's playing an MSU game. Particularly if you can maybe sort of, wipe a unit out or break them and then link the pursuit through into another unit and just kind of cascade through. You could hit quite hard with these guys. So there's possibly some play there, but they are pricey. Trebuchet at 100 points, and remember this does come out of your 0 to 1 per 1,000 point slot as well. So only one of those things. I'm going to say, given the limited effectiveness of template weapons at large, and also the likelihood that you may be getting charged very early on in the game on the smaller boards, at which point the crew are just going to die, and then the thing's gone and it's useless. I'm going to say probably not on the Trebuchet for me, but if I'm running an Exiles list, then the Border Prince's Bombard is a really interesting option. Same points, also comes out of that 0 to 1 slot. Does have the same vulnerability to getting charged, but it brings a lot. You've obviously got the potential essentially for cannon sniping characters and or any sort of monsters or high toughness models. I don't know really what the 500 point meta is going to look like, but there's certainly the potential for some armies to bring some relatively punchy and high toughness single models, which with a human faction like Bretonnians, we are otherwise going to struggle to provide much of an answer to. So the ability to just kind of punk them with a cannon, could be very useful. I think that could be a good shout. There's one more rare option for the exiles, only for the exiles, which we could bring is the Border Prince's Brigands. They come out the rare choice slot. I haven't even got a slide in them because, to be honest, for a rare choice, there's basically the same price as Men at Arms without really bringing anything obvious extra, and then also being impetuous. I'm basically writing them off. I'm not going to look at those. You do sometimes some of the lists have options for mercenaries as well. I'm not going to go into those. I think I'm just going to stick with the main lists. So those are our options. I want to finish just having a look through a few army lists that I've pulled together, just sort of drafting some options, playing with some options. What I've done is I've taken each of the 3 army lists you can choose from, so the Grand Army and the 2 armies of infantry, and I've worked up 2 options for each, looking at sort of just trying to the whole sort of spectra of ways you could play Bretonnians within these rules. I'm not saying any of these are the army I'm going to bring to the tournament. I don't know yet. I'm still thinking about it. We're really interested to hear your feedback, so do get in touch in the comments. Just to go through them. So first of all, looking at the Grand Army list, the first option I put together is what I consider a very classic, very standard Bretonnian army, but trying to sort of bring the punch at the character level. So I've got a Paladin, he's on a Barded Pegasus, he's got a shield and a lance, and I've given him the Grail Vow. And then I've got 2 units of 6 Knights of the Realm, Mounted Knights of the Realm, both with full command, and I've got 1 unit of 10 Peasant Bowmen. Don't have to give the Paladin the Grail Vow, but the main reason I've done so is to give him the Stubborn rule. Basically, he's going to lose combats on his own. If he charges off into combats on his own, and being on the Pegasus, he's fast, he's got the ability to do that. The risk is that he's just going to lose the combat on static combat res. So what Stubborn does, it gives him the ability, he can fly ahead, engage an enemy unit, do some damage, kill a few models. He's probably still going to lose the combat on static combat res. Then using Stubborn, he's going to fall back in good order, draw that enemy unit out of position, and put them somewhere they're then, well positioned for you to support charge in the flank with one or both of your units of knights. That's how I would see that playing out. Alternatively, here you could swap the Paladin on the Pegasus for a Baron on a Bretonnian Warhorse. If you lose one of the command models from either of the units of knights to swap him in, then you could just afford to kit him out of a lance and shield as well. So, that would work quite well if rather than having that sort of separate character, you wanted to put a big punchy character in a unit. That would be another variation on this. My second option, this is fairly similar, but we're now looking at bringing a second character and bringing magic to the list. So obviously that first list, but I mean, by no means at 500 points am I necessarily expecting every opponent to be bringing magic. I think that's going to be quite an interesting choice for a lot of armies. Do you or don't you bring a caster? But we know, magic is quite powerful in the game. So what we've done here, basically we've traded the Pegasus for a damsel at level 2, which I don't think is a bad idea at all. The units of knights will be slightly reconfigured. So the idea here is one of the units has gone down to 5 knights, and the Paladin, who's now on a Warhorse rather than the Pegasus, will go into that unit of 5 knights. the other thing is that we've on the other unit of knights, well, both units of knights, we've lost the champion and the musician, but we do still have banners in both of them. And the peasant bowmen are just a basic minimum unit of 10 bowmen as before. In terms of variations on this, you could lose one of the units of knights. You don't have to have the 3 units. You could go down to 2, and do some other things in terms of upgrades to characters, or you could swap the units of knights out for a unit of peasant bowmen. So have a second unit of bowmen, go for 20 bowmen in total, and then you would have some points available for upgrades to your characters or going full command in the remaining units of knights. Bearing in mind that on the Bretonnian warhorse, your paladin also has capacity for either vows or magic items as well. Well, the other thing you can consider doing there would be mounting the damsel. So interestingly, if we put her in a unicorn, that brings us to exactly 125 points, a level 2 damsel on a unicorn. And the unicorn conveys a whole range of benefits, particularly if you're going from maybe like a fightier wizard build. So if you're going to give a battle magic, take hammer hand as a signature spell, as an assailant spell, actually put her into combat. I know normally we might try and avoid that with our casters, but possibly at this point's range there could be some options there for playing it that way. Then yeah, putting her on a unicorn would be a really interesting, really strong option there. Moving on to Errantry Crusade, the first option I'm looking at with an Errantry Crusade is your classic all cavalry list, which is really what the Errantry Crusade is about. So this very much embraces that spirit of the Army of Infamy. So we've got a paladin on a Bretonnian warhorse, a shield and lance. We have a unit of 5 knights of the realm that the paladin's going to go into. And then another unit of 6 knights of the realm with a full command. And then a third unit, which is 5 questing knights. We get a very simple but very fast and punchy force consisting of 3 lances of knights overall. So, we're going to be able to hit quite hard with that. Again, on the smaller boards, good chance we're going to be charging turn 1, and the goal is simply going to be to power through your opponents, ideally wiping out smaller units and then following through into others until there's nothing left, or breaking them and running them down. At least that's the theory. I think the big weakness and risk with this list is the potential to get bogged down in combats. The Knights of the Realm and the Paladin there with lances, they are much, much more powerful on the charge than they are in subsequent rounds of combat. So, if you face an enemy with a bit more holding power who can keep them locked in combat for a second round, suddenly they have much less hit. And I think that's the risk. They're going to play quite well against small units. They're going to play quite well against, fairly weak units. But, someone who's able to bring like a big, solid, heavy infantry or heavy cavalry to kind of oppose this, they're going to hit that and they're going to struggle a bit more. The other thing with this is, again, I'm assuming we're going to be able to occupy the tower in that scenario. And you can't occupy buildings with cavalry. So we might be at a bit of a disadvantage in that kind of objective-based scenario where we can't occupy the tower. The second Errantry Crusade list, I'm going to call this the Grail list. This list is playing around the ideas we were talking about earlier about the Battle Pilgrims and the Grail Reliquae, and just seeing, how we can build a list that absolutely maximizes them and their potential. So the idea is that you would have a block of Battle Pilgrims with the Grail Reliquae, and they're going to play the unbreakable anvil to the hammer that the 2 units of knights are going to play here. So we've got a paladin. He's on the Bretonnian warhorse. He's got shield and lance. He's also got the Grail Vow, obviously to help, increase the chances that the Reliquae is in range, and therefore they get that buff. There were some points available here, so I've also gone with giving him the Ruby Ring of Ruin. There's no other magic in this, so a bit of magic missile play there potentially could be useful. Then we've got unit of 6 Battle Pilgrims and the Grail Reliquae. So that's basically 12 Battle Pilgrims. It's not a huge unit, but they are unbreakable. Um, so and they're always going to be hitting back with the Grower Reliquary unless they're wiped out. So I think reasonable at this point size. I think that's a reasonable kind of anvil unit. Then we're going to unit of 5 Knights of the Realm with a banner and a musician, and probably your paladin's going to go into that unit. And then we have a unit of 3 Grail Knights. Again, just trying to make sure there's enough units with the Grail Vow on the table that they're always going to be somebody close enough to the Battle Pilgrims to make the best use of them. I think the big compromise to this list is going to be the very low model count. So, we don't have a lot of models, and even with the Grail Knights, they only get 1 wound. So we are potentially very squishy. I like it thematically. I'm not sure if it's going to work. Let me know your thoughts. It's certainly an interesting sort of thematic vibey list, and could be fun from that perspective. But is it just going to get pummeled? Yeah, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. Okay, finally, I'm going to look at 2 options here with the Exiles list. Exiles, I think, are really interesting, as I mentioned earlier. Some options to play in a very different way. The first option is a mass missile list. So this is all about the shooting, which is obviously very un-Bretonnian, but then that is very much the spirit of Exiles. They've been kicked out for various reasons. So, they aren't going to play in the way that we would normally expect Bretonnians to play. We've got a unit of 5 Knights of the Realm of Foot. They are purely included due to the minimum, the mandatory requirement to include a unit of Knights of the Realm. We've just gone for the minimum expenditure. So, a unit of 5 Knights of the Realm of Foot. They're there, they can engage and do something, but they're not really key to the list. Everything else that we see here is really about leveraging the Bretonnians' very cheap and very long range long bowmen that they have available in the peasants and the squires. So we have a total of 43 archers, making this quite a high model count, I would suggest, for a 500-point army. There's a good chance that we're going to be shooting with all 43 of those archers in turn 1, and potentially shooting at short range. We're also bringing 5 units there, so 5 units of missile troops, actually 6 units if you include the Knights of the Realm. So there's a lot of units on the table, which is going to give your opponents a lot to think about. This is a genuine MSU type approach. I think at 500 points, a lot of other armies may only be bringing 2 or 3 units. So yeah, I think this is really interesting. Just giving your opponents that much to have to think about and deal with. Add to this the 2 big hitters on this list. So we have our Outcast Wizard at level 3, which, as we've already talked about, is probably one of very few level 3 wizards that anyone's going to be able to bring. And that's just going to allow us to be a bit more dominant when it comes to magic. And we add the Border Prince's Bombard, which is going to give you the ability, to potentially sort of cannon snipe enemy characters or any higher toughness models. So yeah, whilst it does feel potentially kind of wrong to bring a Bretonnian list without a single mounted model, I'm quite excited by the potential for this list. There are obviously variations you could play on this. So, I mean, the obvious thing would be you could swap out your squires for a unit of mounted yeomen. And we talked about the ability to sort of be very annoying to kind of harry your opponents, and again they are missile troops as well, so would still fit with that sort of vibe of a mass missile army. Final list is really about magical dominance. So we have access to one of very few level 3 wizards, I think, which are going to be available under these list writing rules. And I think one thing that's interesting with these list rules is we've got a maximum character allowance of 250 points, but a maximum spend on any single character of 125 points, which basically means if we can take 1, we can take 2. So why not, just completely dominate the magic and bring 2 level 3 Outcast Wizards. That's going to be 210 points. So you've got 290 points left. which you can spend in a variety of ways. What I've done here is run quite a classical Bretonnian setup, and the mandatory requirements do more or less steer you in this direction, but there are options. So I've taken 2 units of 5 Knights of the Realm and 1 unit of 10 Bowmen, and that brings me to exactly 500 points with the 2 level 3 wizards. But you could swap out the 2nd unit of Knights of the Realm for a range of things, particularly including, like, you could still bring a Bombard with this list if you wanted to. If you lost the 2nd unit of Knights of the Realm, that would allow you to bring the Bombards. So that could be quite interesting as well. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, I realise that's been quite a long video, but hopefully interesting. Hopefully some interesting thoughts for you there. I'm really interested to hear what you think. So do get in touch in the comments if you've got any ideas about, you know, how you would play a 500 point Bretonnian list under these rules. Or if there's anything, you know, any of the armies that you like, that you don't like, any that you've got some really good ideas for something you do maybe a bit different, let me know, get in touch. And yeah, I think it's in October, the tournament I'm going to at TSN in Nottingham. So if you're going to be there, I think it's a sold out event now. So I think, you know, like, you know, quite a high number of players going to be there. So yeah, if you know you're coming along to that, let me know. It'd be great to touch base. Hopefully see you there. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, please do like and subscribe. It's really appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.